Hello and welcome. I'm Michelle Benitez, a librarian at Stanford Health Library. Thank you for joining us for our talk, Fiber, Powering Your Health from Within. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Leah Groppo. Leah is a diabetes educator and senior clinical dietitian in Stanford's Endocrinology Clinic and Diabetes Care Program. Leah has experience counseling patients on how to achieve their health goals, interpret pump and CGM data focused on customized diabetes management. At Stanford, she teaches diabetes education classes, conducts one-on-one appointments, teaches fellows and medical students, and mentors interns. Leah is board certified in advanced diabetes management. She has a passion for growing food and loves to garden with her family. Throughout the talk, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the talk, Leah will answer as many of those as possible. I'll turn it over to you, Leah.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, let me grab my slides. Okay, thank you all so much for joining. I'm so excited to chat with you all about fiber. So fiber is something that has really piqued my interest for a very long time, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the research and then really focus on making this talk practical so we can kind of circle back, and as you leave this talk, what can you do? How can your life change? That's always definitely my focus when I'm thinking about giving a talk. So just to give you a little bit of perspective, it's always nice to know, who am I actually listening to? I know you heard the bio, but I'm really a dietitian that's focused on diabetes education, and I really like to focus on sustainable health changes. I actually became really passionate about food when I was in high school. I was a high school kid that my parents would give me some money and I would be able to buy lunch. And when I got to high school, I realized I could buy a cookie, like these two very large cookies, actually, for lunch with my money my parents gave me. And I started eating cookies every day for lunch. And I soon realized I was falling asleep in class. I felt lethargic. I ran track and I wasn't running as well. And I was like, I wonder what's going on. I feel so different. And I realized that having a lunch that was only 2 cookies was not enough energy and not the right type of macronutrients to help fuel the rest of my day. And so that's one of the things that made me realize that the foods that we eat can really impact how we feel in the day and really nourish our souls and our mind and our bodies. And I just wanted to learn more about the science after those experiences. March is National Nutrition Month. So I also wanted to highlight another talk if you're interested. We're doing a lunch and learn on March 26th from 12 to 1 with 4 of our registered dietitians at Stanford. Hope that you can join. So today we're really going to talk about different types of fiber. We're going to talk about the benefits of eating fiber. We're going to really focus on making it practical and leaving with an action plan. So your job here today is to think about, how can I apply this to my life? We all pop into presentations with a different life experience. Maybe we're really focused on pre-diabetes and preventing type 2 diabetes. Maybe we're living with type 2 diabetes and we're thinking about, how do we manage blood sugars throughout our day and feel great? So everybody comes to presentations with a little bit different lens, and you're kind of going to look at this data through that lens. I think it's always good to think about, how do we define fiber? So this is the very fancy definition. I think sometimes it's nice to present. So the non-digestible by human digestive enzymes, carbohydrates, lignans that are intact and intrinsic in plants. Another way to say this is just things that we don't digest that are found in plants. Basically, there are a lot of different types of fibers and very specific fibers, as we will get into more. Through the slides, I've put lots of food pictures. So if you haven't eaten dinner yet, I definitely apologize, because you might be hungry while we go through. So just to kind of talk about that. And then just thinking about, what are we kind of focused on? There's 2 main types of fiber. We have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. I think an apple is a perfect picture to really highlight this. So when we think about an apple, for example, this apple, the outer part, the peel, is insoluble fiber based. The inner part in the shape of the heart in this example is considered where the soluble fiber is found. So each type of fiber gives us different benefits. And so it is really important to know if we have examples like we want to regulate our bowel movements more, we really want to focus more on insoluble fiber. If we're looking at helping to change our lipids profile, for example, or reduce our risk for type 2 diabetes, we're going to also look at soluble fiber. There is also new research that just says just getting more fiber is really the goal, but I think it's also really important to think about the specific functions of each type of fiber as we go through. So getting into soluble fiber. So soluble fiber, which is great because it actually sounds like what it is. It's water soluble. So fiber that dissolves in water. What does soluble fiber do? Well, it delays gastric emptying. So what does that mean? When we eat foods that have more soluble fiber, they move through our digestive tract actually slower. And so for that, that can cause increased satiety. It's hanging out in our stomach a little bit longer and creating more fullness as we're eating. It also can do things like lower our cholesterol because some of those fibers can kind of almost like hug and package different fat molecules so they can't be absorbed into the bloodstream from the gut. They can also decrease glucose absorption. So they can also kind of make it your bioavailability of the carbohydrates that you're consuming to be a little bit lower. I always think about it almost like a sponge. So fiber comes in and it helps kind of form that gel, almost like on this side, I guess it looks a little bit like a dirty sponge, but more like a not rehydrated sponge, like a flatter sponge that's ready to accept more water and puff up versus the puffy sponge. So when you eat fiber, it's ready to form that gel and delay gastric emptying, lower lipids, decrease glucose absorption. So I always think sponge when I think soluble fiber, sponge or gel, things like that. So a food highlight that I really wanted to talk about too was beta-glucan. It's found in oats and barley food. It's been really well studied. And really it shows specifically that it reduces serum cholesterol and improves blood sugar control. And so these are things that people have just invested more money in to study. And that's why different labels will say may lower cholesterol. I think there's some cereals that have that brand and label, because people have funded those studies to prove that more evidence-based claim. It doesn't mean that other foods that are high in soluble fiber don't provide that same benefit, but perhaps no one has funded all of those studies. But I think that, yeah, it's really interesting to know how food can really help to move some of those numbers. I also think that it's really important. Sometimes when we make changes around the foods that we're eating, we really want a next day change or a yesterday change, right? I ate oatmeal, for example, seal cut oatmeal for breakfast this week. My lipids must have changed. Sometimes it does take time for these numbers to move. So really putting something that's very sustainable, maybe not doing something like seal cut oatmeal every day if you don't like it, but finding foods that you do like and sprinkling them out through your day over 3 months will really make more meaningful changes to your numbers. Some other foods to think about when adding soluble fiber, things like oatmeal, barley, chia seeds, beans, lentils, blueberries, plantains, berries, apples, broccoli are all things that have soluble fiber. I know some people are really big numbers people. I feel like my brain works in really more broad concepts, but I do have a list. It's small print, but for people who like those exact numbers to kind of look for them. And my slides can be posted as well. And so these are some examples. So these are foods that are higher in soluble fiber. And as you can see here, just like the apple example, a lot of foods, they have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. It's not like you're going to get a food that's solely soluble. So I think that it's good. There's always going to be a balance, but some foods will weigh a little bit heavier on the soluble. other foods will weigh a little bit heavier on the insoluble. So getting into the other type of fiber, so thinking about insoluble fiber. So just like soluble is soluble in water, insoluble fiber is not soluble in water. And this is actually something that is a little bit more interesting. It actually speeds up your transit time. So it helps with bowel movements, and it can also increase your fecal bulk. So when people think about constipation, we're really thinking about adding more insoluble fiber to the diet. Again, more like the peels, more what we might call is like roughage. So some foods that are higher in insoluble fiber, like wheat products, like when people are saying whole wheat grains, things like seeds like quinoa, brown rice, legumes, beans and lentils, leafy greens like kale, some nuts, avocados, they have both, but do weigh a little bit heavier towards insoluble fiber. So all these different foods really kind of contribute to insoluble intake and help with our bowel movements and also to keep our gut healthy. I don't know if everyone's already feeling hungry if they haven't had dinner yet, but we're getting into all the food pictures. And again, if you're a numbers person, here are some examples of insoluble sources. And like you can see, they have insoluble and also soluble for most food products. And here are some more. I'm always wanting to think about how do we sort of, without having to look at a list, look at something and figure it out, right? How do we look at that big picture? So when we're thinking about, is something probably leaning more towards insoluble or towards soluble? I always think about back to the plant. So fiber-based foods come from plants. And so if we think about like a stalk, for example, like in this pea plant, that's actually in the front of my yard, the stalk part that is creating that structure for that plant so that it doesn't topple over, that's insoluble fiber within that. When we're thinking about the structure for the pea shells, that's also going to weigh more towards insoluble fiber. When we look at that inside, that pea part, that's going to be more where the soluble fiber comes from. So parts of plants that create structure and need to create structure so the plant doesn't topple over, that is most commonly where you're going to find insoluble fiber. So even if you're going through the store and maybe you're someone who wants to increase your insoluble fiber, think about things that are going to be more like bases, stalks of plants. That's going to lead more towards insoluble foods. Because it's really, I mean, lists are great sometimes, but we don't need to eat off of lists. We want to eat real foods and think about the foods that we really kind of like and enjoy. And just in a plant cell and plant cell wall is where a lot of the fiber is really found. So that's why we're talking a lot about eating more produce. So National Nutrition Month, 12 months out of the year, I'm talking all about produce and veggies and adding fruits into our diet to increase our fiber, but also lots of other health benefits. So this is something actually that came in with one of the questions, and I also think that it's really great to think about and talk about as well, so we're on the same page. But does it really matter where our fiber is coming from? Can we just start buying like a fiber supplement and just adding into our day? Is that fine? And eat the same type of diet? Or do we really want to isolate and think about what foods have fiber that we also really enjoy to start thinking about adding those in our diet? And we do really want to aim for getting whole foods first. The American Heart Association, for example, really does kind of think and aim and direct more towards a food first approach. And I also definitely agree with that. So if it's really hard to get that amount of fiber, there are other reasons. You've been recommended to have a fiber supplement, of course, go ahead. But really thinking about how do we add more foods into our day that will increase our fiber. I think that's great. And then also thinking about less pulverized options. I couldn't think of a better word. Pulverized, it's just what I think about. So thinking around really flour-based product, we want to think more about that whole grain intact grain products. So in this picture, these are actually wheat berries. So they're the whole part of the wheat. And then below them is that they've been made into flour. So they've been milled. And the reason why we want to think about that whole wheat berry option kind of first is because it has a little bit kind of less processing. So our bodies have to do the chewing and this processing. Those fiber haven't been milled and put into smaller particles. So trying to focus more on that kind of whole food first. If you're eating whole grains and whole grain bread, 100% whole wheat bread, that's also definitely a fine option. But if you're feeling adventurous, trying to make a wheat berry salad, for example, can be a really fun new experiment. When you eat wheat berries and you cook them, they do take a little bit longer to cook, but in your mouth, they really almost like pop a little bit, and they have a really nice nutty flavor naturally. They actually go really well with olive oil, pesto, things like that. And so it's just a great new food option to maybe think about adding. So this is also something I think it's important to know. How much fiber are we really looking at? So in general, most people are lower on the fiber recommendations, maybe around like 10 to 14 grams per day. But we really want to think about aiming around 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men. The reason why the grams for men are bigger is because men tend to have a little bit higher energy needs sometimes, more calories. And so another way to look at it is if you're having a lower calorie diet, about every 1,000 calories, getting at least 14 grams of fiber for that. And then if you're currently pregnant, about 25 grams are the ACOG guidelines. And then really thinking about our fiber through our life stages. So that I gave recommendations for people around 30 to 50 years old. When you're above 50, men drops down to 30 grams and women to 21 because there's probably less energy consumption, less energy need to maintain weight. And then above 71 years, we also keep it at that little bit lower weight. If you feel like you're somebody who is having a little bit harder time getting as much food in, just prioritizing fiber foods can kind of help you get to those numbers. And then to really get into kind of the idea, like, why are we thinking about kind of focusing on fiber? What is the benefit of fiber other than being in lots of foods that are super delicious? A lot of people are motivated by so many things, right? Maybe they've had a doctor visit or a visit with somebody else, a healthcare provider, and that healthcare provider said, can you eat more fiber? And so you're kind of in that short visit wondering, okay, I'm supposed to, there's benefits, but what really are they? So we'll get into that a little bit more. We're going to talk about heart health. It can really help with glucose regulation, reducing inflammation, gut health, and may help with some cancer prevention. So these fiber foods. And when we look at research studies in nutrition, the gold standard is a randomized clinical trial, right? You have two groups of people, fairly similar. They're randomized into two different groups, and one is given maybe like a placebo and one is given the intervention. With nutrition, sometimes it's hard to do those randomized clinical trials. So we do things called observational studies. So observational studies are just what they sound like. And what we do is we look at the way that people tend to eat. They can do food frequencies. We get to know like the types of foods and categorize. Is this someone who has eaten higher fiber foods from the last couple of years? And then we track people to see what types of outcomes. Of course, observational studies have a lot more noise in them because somebody's just kind of living their life. And so they're not so controlled like a randomized clinical control trial. So sometimes you have to have really big N sizes. So a lot of people to really create what is going to give that example. So getting into those lipids and thinking about heart healthy. So we mentioned the beta glucan, for example, in barley and oats has been shown to reduce serum cholesterol. And then I always think about it in this way. So fat, as it's digesting and going through our digestive tract, it actually doesn't like to, it's water avoidant. And so as it's going and moving through, some of the fiber can kind of coat it, and it doesn't allow those lipids, those fats, to form what we call these micelles. So micelles are these cells that fat have to kind of go and form this thing, where there are parts that don't want to touch water are inside, and there are parts that are okay to touch water on the outside to kind of protect them to go through that gut membrane, these little cells that line our gut called enterocytes, to get into the bloodstream. Because when we think about things that are actually influencing if we get a blood draw for lipids or for our blood sugar, all of that has to get from our gut into our bloodstream for it to have that impact. If it just stays in our gut, eventually we're going to excrete it out in stool. So everything that is impacting in our bloodstream has gotten from that gut barrier, or our body has naturally created it. So if it stays in the gut, that's kind of the benefit there, and eventually will be excreted, but it also has to get across the membrane to affect those lipid levels. And so this fiber can help sort of reduce that. When we think about blood sugar, for example, this is something that I'm super passionate about chatting about and really like. And I think as I've worked as a diabetes educator more and more, I've realized that not all grams of carbs are created equal. So when I first started working, we really focused just on gram for gram. So we really talked about how to count carbohydrates and just look at the gram rather than the type of food. And so we've really moved more into the types of food. We even had a big recommendation paper that came out in 2019, and it really emphasized quality of nutrition rather than just counting grams. And I was really happy to see that, because I think instead of getting into focus on counting carbs and grams, sometimes people need to, maybe dosing insulin or other things. But we do also want to think about just the quality of food that we're eating, what foods make us happy, what foods bring us pleasure and joy. So eating can be that full experience, not like a math equation. So I really do like to see that. So thinking about oatmeal has fiber, right? Soluble fiber. When we think about oats, if we think about steel cut oats, which are less processed, right? Versus quick cooking oats. So quick cooking oats have been steamed already, the oat, and then they've been flattened, and then they've been chopped up into little pieces. So actually, when you take quick cooking oats, you're not getting rid of the amount of fiber in the oats, but you're processing it down and doing more changes to it so that it's going to be more bioavailable to your body. And so your body is going to have a faster blood sugar response to things like cooking oats versus steel cut oatmeal. Your body's going to have to work harder with that steel cut oatmeal to chew it longer, to really sort of break down those carbohydrates. Carbohydrate digestion starts in our mouth with enzymes in our mouth that help us to start breaking down our carbohydrates in our mouth. Quick cooking oats work very fast. And so thinking about, even though both have fiber, just really trying to think about more that intact food product if possible. And then also insoluble fiber definitely helps to decrease and form that gel, slow glucose absorption in the blood. And so that also really helps. A lot of people like to let their bodies have a little bit more time versus kind of dumping that glucose and blood sugar into their bloodstream is a little bit easier on blood sugar, a little bit more steady. Also, even though this doesn't have to do with fiber, but pairing things that have carbohydrates that may be a little bit faster with a healthy fat or a healthy protein can also sort of help delay that effect. Something I really think is a great option is, even though it's super trendy, avocado toast. It's super tasty. Avocados are very high in fiber, have healthy fats, and also sort of really balance out on whole grain bread to create a more steady blood sugar curve. The data from blood sugar, a lot of it is more in prevention of people of type 2 diabetes. And so we really do need some better studies around people living with type 2 diabetes and what fiber does in their bodies as well. It makes sense that it would be very similar, but we don't have those landmark studies like we do more in prediabetes. Thinking about lowering inflammation. So this is definitely a hot topic. I feel like people are always really interested in that, in lowering inflammation. And really thinking about how fiber really feeds our gut bacteria. And that really helps to lower inflammation from sort of inside out, from our gut. Because fiber is broken down more in the large intestine. And that fiber that's broken down is eaten by those bacteria. And from that, they create these different acid types. And those are things like butyric acid, acetic acid. They help fuel the cells in the colon. So they feed all of those cells in your gut so that they also have nutrition. So when we don't eat any fiber in our diet, those cells are really having a hard time getting fed and being as robust as they can. And these cells in turn really help us to reduce and lower our inflammation. It also helps us to really help prioritize and feed up those bacteria we want to have more in our gut. And once those gut bacteria populate more, then there's less room for gut bacteria that are less healthy in our body. There was a study that I was reading that's listed below, and they were giving people barley, for example, for the soluble fiber. And they did find a benefit in the gut bacteria. So kind of prioritizing more the BAPB bacteria. But then they did say that when in the washout period, when there was no more of that given, a lot lower fiber diet, then those gut bacteria did decline in rate. So we do want to have kind of a more consistent intake of fiber if possible. I also wanted to reorient us before we go to more our second half of the presentation and really think about why do we all eat? Why do we kind of come? Why am I a dietitian? Because fiber foods, plant foods are delicious. I believe that food is part of our community. We can share food, enjoy food. Food is nourishment to our bodies and also our souls. Food is definitely pleasure and enjoyment. And I think food can be full of memories. We have all these memories associated with food. I always just think about that change I mentioned when I was eating cookies for lunch. They were delicious, but I moved over and started having a peanut butter, banana, and whole wheat bread sandwich, and that really fueled me up for my runs. So those memories, to me, when I think about those types of sandwiches, I smell like the cut grass. I think about all the camaraderie and my track team. And that was a lot of years ago. So food can really be tied to great memories. And just really thinking about what food means to you and trying to recenter ourselves. Like, food is meant to be pleasure and enjoyed. And that's why we have so many flavors and textures and fun things. So I think the first part of my presentation was a little bit more scientific and numbers based. And now I want to get more into like food is pleasure and enjoyment, and how do we move forward from here after we know some of the whys and the science. Plus, it's really fun to make presentations and look for food pictures and meals and all of that. It's always enjoyable. So how do we meet our fiber goals? I have a little bit more number stuff, but I like to break this down. So if we're somebody who's aiming for 25 grams of fiber per day, that's about 8 grams per meal if we only eat 3 times a day, or it's about 6 grams per if you do 3 meals and maybe 1 snack, or 3 meals and 2 snacks with 3 grams each. If you're aiming for 30 grams, and you only eat 3 meals, that's 10 grams per meal, or it's 7.5 grams for meals if you do 3 meals and 1 snack, or you can divide that 7.5 into 2 snacks, or if you're somebody who just likes to graze all day, then you can think about how you divide that out. Going back to kind of the slide where we think about food as enjoyment and community, I do think it's also important when we start fiber goals. Hopefully you all are already thinking about all the foods that you may want to add to your intake that you would enjoy in your day. But you also want to start slow when you're adding an extra fiber. You don't want to tomorrow start counting and try to get right to 25 grams of fiber if maybe you're in like the 10 or 15 gram range, because that's a really large change. And your gut bacteria, like we mentioned in that study, how the gut bacteria, if there's less fiber, different gut bacteria will decrease. And others will increase. So if we just start adding in lots of fiber, we're going to get a lot of flatulence and uncomfortable and bloating, because our body's going to not be prepared for such a large swing in an increase of roughage and fiber into our intestine. So we want to start slow. It also makes it more of a reasonable change to start slow, rather than to say, I'm going to count all my grams of fiber and add it in and change everything I'm doing. Those tend to not be as sustainable changes. If you're somebody who doesn't like to think always about numbers and tracking, I tend to lean more towards that way in my own personal life. Just think about adding color. How many plants are you eating? Are you eating veggies? Are you adding beans, lentils, whole grains to your day? Do you have a variety of colors within that? Do you have a variety of types of the plant? For example, are you somebody who only eats the sugar snap peas or the snow peas? Or are you also stir frying the pea shoots, right? So they're all going to give you something a little bit different and give a little bit of benefit. So even just thinking about the types of foods that we're eating, I think can also really help if we're not numbers people. I feel like we have so many things to count in our life, and sometimes counting food things is not always as fun either, but more looking at recipes online and finding what we would enjoy, and chatting with our family and seeing what everyone would enjoy if we eat with other people. So to bring us back, starting line, where do we start? We start with one meal. So not with everything, not a big overhaul, because that's probably going to be put off and put off. We start with one meal or even one snack. And I always think the best meal to start with is the meal that you have the most autonomy over. What meal do you not have lots of feedback from family members, that you're not dependent on other people to go out with? What meal do you have kind of the most autonomy for that? And that could be breakfast, it could be a snack, it could be lunch, it could be dinner. It just depends on kind of what your day looks like. But I say choosing the meal that you have the most autonomy over, because that's the meal that you're going to be able to make the biggest change and have the most control over that change, versus a meal that really depends on what other people like to eat and want to eat. So I also acknowledge that not everyone is I'm more of that less numbers, but I know a lot of people really like numbers, and I think numbers can really be helpful. So I do have some examples for some numbers people. I was brainstorming lots of different food ideas earlier, and I know the slides are kind of busy because I just write out some examples, but sometimes it's nice to know, where can I start, right? So I start with breakfast ideas. So what are some breakfast ideas to get to like maybe that 8 grams of fiber for breakfast? So like we mentioned, that whole wheat toast with half an avocado, that gets you to 8 grams, and an egg. If that doesn't feel filling enough, you could have another one, 16 grams, or you could add something else if you'd like. Oat bran, I do like oat bran. A 30 cup provides about 7 grams of fiber. You could have it with milk, a plant-based milk, dairy milk, whichever you like, with yogurt, Greek yogurt, or just regular yogurt, berries. And so that ends up being about 9 grams of fiber. 2 eggs with some cactus or nopales, about a cup. That has a lot of really great soluble fiber, nopales, and a really nice kind of flavor. They're really good for breakfast with eggs. And corn tortillas, that's 9 grams of fiber. Thinking around, some brands are called, there's a double fiber English muffin that has a lot more fiber, some fiber supplements in it, but 8 grams of fiber for that. You could do like almost like a breakfast sandwich, an egg, cheese, meat if you want, or you can make it vegetarian, do spinach and veggies, maybe add some feta in there or something like that. And so that's also going to get you to a higher gram fiber breakfast. And then finally, just thinking about if you wanted a breakfast burrito. I mean, I love to make breakfast burritos because you can freeze them, you can have them on hand, and you have breakfast ready to go in 30 seconds. You can just heat it up, or a minute, and then you're already out the door. You can do a flour tortilla with eggs, sweet potato hash, bell peppers, throw lots of veggies in there, or you can use a high fiber tortilla. So either 6 grams, or it could be even up to 20 grams if you're using a high fiber tortilla. Some snack ideas are half a quarter cup almonds, an apple gets you above the 8. And maybe you're going to focus more on snacks being higher fiber and meals being lower fiber. You totally get to choose. These are just some examples of if you're starting with one meal or one snack you would add in, it would get you farther away towards your fiber goals. Roasted chickpeas, 8 grams. Corn chips with guacamole is a really delicious and filling snack. Whole grain crackers and cheese. Thinking about lunch or dinner. So one of our other dietitians did a cooking demonstration, and she gave a mushroom and lentil bolognese sauce, and it had 10 grams of fiber in it. Alex, it's posted. Maybe we can link that talk as well. She did a talk on plant-based, so she used a lot of beans and lentils, and all of her recipes are really high fiber. Pasta with a side salad, 14 grams of fiber. So that's a big higher fiber option. I love stuffed bell peppers. It's something that I feel like is a meal. You can just throw whatever you want in them, add whatever sauce you want, rice, meat. You can make it plant-based, add lentils or tofu, but it's high fiber, having a pear as well. Stir-fried veggies with whatever sauce you like, meat, plant-based meat, whichever one you like. Rice, white or brown would be fine. White rice is about maybe like half a gram of fiber per cup, maybe 0.6. Brown rice is a little bit more. But either way, this meal would be high fiber. And then just another example, my last one. So a cup of snow peas, salmon miso, and then 1 cup of white rice or brown rice, whichever you want. Also gets you to that 8 grams if you want to just have the 3 meals and get to your fiber goals of 25. So these are just some examples, and perhaps hopefully something maybe appealed to you that you could think about adding. So if at the end of the talk you're like, maybe I'd like to have that snack, or think about packing that snack, or try that meal or that recipe, that can be a good thing to think about. I do always like to kind of continue to pull out and think about that bigger picture, because I know we've talked a lot about some more very specific things, but just think, we find fiber in plants. And so it's always great to increase your plant consumption. So if you look at something, think, is this produce? Is it a plant-based food from plants that's not, the fiber hasn't been processed out of it? Thinking about adding more of those foods versus not getting so focused on the numbers, because sometimes that can take the joy of eating away. I know some people really like to think about numbers for a little while, just so they're making sure they are hitting these higher fiber goals, and then they like to step back and not really think about numbers. And so just thinking, just another kind of piece of food for thought. So the final part of my talk, and then I know there were actually a lot of really great questions. I want to leave some good time for that. Just thinking around, what's the call to action? How do we make a change? So how do we add more fiber to our diet? We can start with meals or snacks. If we're feeling really stuck, and maybe you think, man, Leah, none of those things sounded appealing to me that you listed that were higher fiber, I'm not offended. That's totally okay. You want to give yourself advice. So you know yourself, you know your taste buds, you know what you like to eat. Like, what advice would you give yourself? Like, Leah, if you want to increase fiber, the meal that you have the most autonomy over is your breakfast. Maybe think about having like oat bran with breakfast, or think about adding berries. So all those things would add more fiber. Knowing what you really want to change, and then really starting small. So start with that one meal. Even think about, when we start with that meal and we want to increase fiber, we need to have the plant-based foods on hand. We know sometimes plant-based foods perish a little bit faster if they're fresh. Perhaps we think about buying them in a frozen option first. So we get frozen broccoli or frozen fruit or something like that, so that we know, in case it's hard for us that week to incorporate them, we still have the option to do that the following week, a little bit less pressure. And then also thinking about this concept called the empathy gap. This is something I try to talk about all the time. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. because I think it just is so important. We want to make the goals, and when we want to make the change, we want to make that goal in that moment. So if we're making a change around dinner, for example, we want to make that goal when we're driving home from work at 4 or 5 p.m. and we're really hungry and we're tired and we had a busy day, we might be stressed. That's when we want to think about what's a realistic change in goal. Because if we think about what's a realistic change in goal at 12 p.m., after we had a really filling, delicious lunch, we may not set forth the most realistic goal for that moment at that different time point. So that's kind of the empathy gap. So creating this more empathy around, sometimes we set goals that aren't realistic because maybe we're not in the same mindset and frame that it takes to create that goal. So when we have to actually implement that goal, it's not that we're not doing a good job or we have no willpower. It's that maybe that goal wasn't truly a realistic option for us. And then I like plants, but always think about like growing, and we're always growing forward. I always like to think when I feel frustrated for myself with a change and like, oh, Leah, why can't you do this? I always think back, what's something I've changed in the last year? Where was I at last year? And I can normally list about 3 things that I've changed for my health. And I can always think, wow, like a year ago, it would have been hard to imagine doing that. And now I've really put it into habit so much that it's on autopilot. And so that can be the same thing for things like increasing fiber, for example. We can feel tricky and hard in the beginning. And then we look back a year past, we're like, oh my gosh, of course I'm having fiber with breakfast. It's just a no-brainer. But sometimes it takes a long time to put that into practice, and just realizing that too. And being kind to yourself in that process. And then this is just something else. I think I put this here because I feel it sometimes, but not getting paralyzed in our perfection. So sometimes we say, if we're a woman and we're not getting to 25 grams, or we're a man and we're not getting 38 grams, for example, then there's no point in doing it. But we really want to break it down and say, can we increase our fiber for a meal, for a snack, for a day in the week? It doesn't have to be everything. And also with your diet, there's no such thing as perfect. Everybody is unique. Every body is unique. So I just try to kind of throw this thought out. But I think sometimes it can kind of paralyze us a little bit to make our first step in our change. If we feel like the change doesn't have as much value, or it's not a good enough change or a big enough change. So just kind of challenging that thought and say, any change is like, it's going to be healthy for my body. And even if it's something I'm not going to end up doing, then I've learned that maybe that's a food I don't like. Maybe you try wheat berries and you go, Leah said it was nutty. I don't really think it's very nutty. I want to try something else. Totally fine, but you tried it. And then finally, just thinking about at the end of this talk, is there something that you'd like to do around adding fiber? And if there is, how can you make that goal very tangible? So specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and having a time limit. Because this is what helps us to kind of create a path. So if we just say something like, after this talk, I just want to eat some more fiber. That doesn't give the groundwork and the map to help us do that. For example, if we focus and say, I would like to purchase like 2 bags of frozen veggies to put in my freezer and add into 3 meals a week, right? That's super actionable, and that's going to get you to an increased fiber versus just this desire. The desire is the first step. The SMART goal is what actually is the map that gets you to the change. Here's just a couple examples, because I know people like examples. I do too. So maybe I'll add half a cup of beans or lentils to 1 meal 3 times per week. I'll add 1 piece of fruit to my snack 4 days per week for the next month, or I'll add a 1/4 cup of nuts to a snack when I'm hungry at 3 p.m. So these exemplify being more SMART goals. They may not feel like they're every day, they're large changes, but they're all things that move us in that direction. And then just really thinking through your goal and seeing what it takes to accomplish. So when we think about adding in beans to a meal 3 days per week, we need to have them on hand. We need to put them on our grocery list. We need to purchase them. We need to find recipes that we enjoy adding them to if we're not used to eating beans. We need to figure out if other people's taste buds also are happy with that change. So there's actually a lot of things that can go into each of these goals that may seem like small goals, but when you really think about it, it actually is maybe 10 steps within one goal. So really giving yourself credit that making these changes actually has a lot more steps than just one. And then with that, that is all the content that I have for today. And I know I've left some time for questions, and I was so happy to get so many questions about fiber before the talk. So I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks, Leah. That was great. And thank you everyone for submitting your questions beforehand and during the talk. I'll start off with you gave us so many good ideas for how to increase fiber in our diet. We had a question around, is it possible, if you're a little too gung-ho, is it possible to increase it too much at one time so that you might have some GI issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love the gung-ho idea, especially if you leave this talk and you feel really excited about it. I think that's great and motivated. If you ramp up fiber too fast, the gut flora in your gut may not be prepared for all of that extra fiber. And so you can get a lot of negative side effects, maybe more gas, more bloating, more increased transit time with your bowel movements, but faster than you'd like. So it is really good to maybe stick with that one meal, increasing by between 6 and 8 grams of fiber. Add the higher fiber meal. Make sure you're also consuming water when you add fiber, because fiber likes to form that gel, like that sponge example we used. So if you're not drinking extra fiber, it can also kind of dry out your stool a little bit more. So definitely that's a great thing. When I was in my studying nutrition, actually, we started talking a lot about fiber. I got super gung-ho. And I increased my fiber. I think one day I had 40 grams of fiber in a day. And then after that, I couldn't eat fiber for a week. I was my stomach hurt so much. And so it's good to slowly increase.
Okay. Building off that, somebody was asking about a fiber that might be more gentle on the digestive system for people who have a hard time handling a lot of fiber.
Yeah, I go first with soluble fiber. So soluble fiber that really helps with all of those kind of more metabolic things like blood sugar and lipids, forming that gel, slowing gastric emptying. I think insoluble fiber and really high insoluble fiber can be a little bit more, it increases transit time, speeds things up, gives you more bowel movements, and it can be, maybe you don't want to start as much with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Two kind of similar questions. What do you think about drinking your veggies, either blending them in a smoothie or perhaps from one of those veggie powders you see? Do those have fiber?
Yeah, often. So if it's a dehydrated powder, like dehydrated veggies whole and then powdered, there is definitely fiber within that. Often they'll add extra fiber, like a fiber supplement, like inulin, something like that, to really increase that fiber amount. Same with smoothies. So that kind of goes more towards the pulverized fiber idea. I'd say it's better than not having the fiber, but really trying to prioritize those whole foods first.
Great, thank you. And about the cooking or processing, does cooking a food make the fiber? Is it less ideal, or if you're processing it?
Oh yeah, fiber is heat stable, so it's fine. So things like B12, vitamin C, things like that can get degraded in cooking, but fiber is fine. So you can cook your veggies if you want. It's actually interesting when you cook your veggies, how the plant cell walls have a lot of fiber. When you cook or steam them, they actually kind of get smaller. So you can pack in a lot more veggies into a cup when you cook them. So I think cooking is great. Like if you've ever cooked a big, huge bag of spinach and then you're left with a small amount, yeah. It's because all those like cell membranes get a little bit tighter. And then you get more fiber per cup, but a higher weight amount.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, several people are really curious about lentils. Are they rich in fiber?
Yes, I love lentils and beans. They're a great way to really amp up fiber. And lentils and beans tend to be, not always, but tend to be almost from starch and the fiber part of the carb because fiber is a part of a carbohydrate. So, carbohydrate umbrella, sugars, fibers, starches, all under that umbrella. And in general, beans and lentils tend to be 50% starchy that can raise blood sugar, convert to glucose, and about 50% fiber based that don't do that. So even though they tend to be a little bit higher in carb, they tend to really have a lot nicer blood sugar sort of profile with raising blood sugar. And they're
Great.
delicious.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many amazing ways you can add lentils. You can add different colors of beans. So even like if you stir fry Swiss chard, we made that the other night, and then you can add garbanzo beans to it or kidney beans. You can add lentils to the red sauce if you want. You can make lentil salad with like cucumbers and mint, things like that. So lots of flavors that really pop.
Great. Okay, this is kind of a techie question. Do you know of or recommend an app where somebody could track their fiber intake?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there are a lot of nutrition tracking apps, like MyFitnessPal, different things. Most of them do gear more towards maybe a more weight loss directed focus. And this is definitely not the point of this talk. So you can use them to help count and tally up. Carb Manager is another one that really focuses, they call more net carbs. Net carbs isn't actually a true term. It's just something that food companies have made up. But a net carb is the subtraction of all the fiber option, but that app really pulls out the fiber if you really want to think about using an app.
Okay, good to know. Oh, here's somebody like me, all about convenience. Um, do you have quick tips, anything that's easy to get extra fiber in our daily diet?
Yeah, I love quick tips. So, if you're someone who does a similar grocery shopping list, or if you do grocery delivery, just having something automated on your list that is fiber, or even bringing things into your house that are frozen, like frozen based veggies, or if you cook a grain, like you want to cook wild rice, for example, you cook a lot at one time, and then you can freeze them in one cup portions and bring them back out so that you can make your meals really fast. And then I always try to spend a little bit of time or recruit other people to chop veggies on a weekend day and peel them. So I only have to do dishes once. And then I have a bunch of veggies to go for the week that I can throw into meals, put into snacks, and have on the go. And then I also think making things easy, like putting them in the forefront, not hiding veggies away in the crisper drawers, although that keeps them a little bit more like they last longer that way. But I do also try to put them more where I see them first in my fridge, and then also try to put all the fruit that doesn't have to be in the fridge on the counter so that it also really helps prompt me to remember to add them. So it's like two parts. I think getting in the house a little bit easier and then making it easy for you just to start enjoying.
Okay, I'm going to try it. Thank you. Um, a couple questions about Metamucil. For people who feel like they're not getting enough fiber in their diet through food, is it okay to meet your requirement using something like Metamucil?
Yeah, Metamucil is more soluble fiber based, and if you really want to, you can add it to your day. I think it's if you can think about what is a soluble food, do you like beans or lentils? Could you add in some of that? That's going to give you a lot of fiber. So in general, like half a cup, maybe 6 grams of fiber just from a half a cup adding in. So you definitely can do that. And then also in the back of your mind, thinking about how can you add in food-based fiber.
Right. This one's really specific, but do you have any thoughts about okra?
Oh yeah, that's a great one. I love okra. Okra is really great. So okra, the outer part is actually higher in insoluble fiber, and kind of that inner part that gets a little gooey depending on how you cook it. That's the soluble fiber part. So I think okra is great. Okra goes in so many different foods with pairs with so many different spices. Is actually like very easy to grow in the Bay Area. You can plant okra seeds actually probably in the next like this and a month forward, and you'll have plenty of okra through the whole season. And so okra is a great option.
Okay, good. That's great.
You can find it at farmers markets too if you don't want to grow it.
Yeah. So a few questions on oats. I know you touched on it a little bit about the quick cut, the quick cook, and is the ones that are old fashioned, like the 5-minute cook, is that better than a quick oat?
Oh yeah. So steel cut oats, less processed, old fashioned, steamed and smashed. Quick cooking oats, steamed, smashed, and chopped. So
Okay,
old fashioned is kind of like that middle ground.
got it. Do you have any thoughts on, you talked about this a little bit, but any more specifics on adding bran to each meal?
Oh yeah, if you're somebody who likes having like wheat bran, for example, it's a really high insoluble fiber option. If it's something that you like to add, I don't know if I'd add it to every meal, but if it's something that's pairing with what you're eating, I think that's fine. But I wouldn't overly increase that. And I think bran in general, it does have the palatability of it is a little bit different. So you do have to be kind of careful in what you add it to. So you're not eating foods that do kind of taste a little bit cardboardy. You do want to enjoy your food as well. But if you like it, I mean, I'll put oat bran into oatmeal, or if I make homemade granola, things like that. And it adds it goes along with the crunch, and it's fine.
Okay. Is there such a thing as too much of a good thing with fiber? Can you have too much that you actually increase your weight or your blood sugar?
Well, so one of the reasons why, if you're eating a little bit less energy, than we do the 1,000 calorie for 14 grams is, if you're just adding and eating more than your body is hungry for, then potentially you're getting more energy than your body needs, more fuel than you're using. But in general, it's more like the GI side effects, I would say. I mean, our goal is not to just more is always better. Because if we just really over prioritize fiber, we also have all these other types of foods that we're trying to eat to have balanced meals. Foods that really don't have as much fiber, like a lot of different protein options don't always have as much fiber. Different healthy fat options, they do have fiber, but maybe more fat. So you just want to look at your whole diet and don't just think about fiber. But I'm super excited. Someone's really excited to add fiber and thinking all the ways that you can add it. That means this talk was successful.
Yeah, I think you had chia seeds on one of your charts with all the numbers, but somebody was wondering about chia seeds for fiber.
Yeah, chia seeds are great for fiber. And they have insoluble and soluble. If you put chia seeds in water, you actually literally see that gel form up from the soluble fiber. And then the insoluble is kind of that outward casing. So chia seeds are great to add if you want to.
They are
But if you don't like them, there's so many other options. That's a great thing about food. There's so many options, so many ways to prepare, so many different flavor profiles and ways to add things. So if there's a food that you're eating just for health, but you don't enjoy it, maybe meet with one of the dietitians. Stanford has a lot of them, and they can help you sort of figure out how you can truly enjoy your food. Because I think everyone deserves to have food that they like to enjoy.
I agree. Let's see. What else do we have? Somebody was asking about a particular farro that's pre-cooked. What's pre-cooking mean, and does that remove some of the fiber?
Oh yeah. So sometimes you'll think like quick cooking farro or quick cooking or parboiled. Sometimes they'll say like parboiled rice. For example, it just means that it's been pre-cooked, kind of like steamed like those oats, and then flattened. But the other grains may not be flattened, but they've been pre-cooked. And so they tend to cook very fast when you rehydrate them. So instead of cooking them from raw form, you're just rehydrating something that has been cooked and dehydrated. So they'll cook a lot faster because a lot of these grains, sometimes they take a really long time to cook. And so people want convenience. Michelle, like you mentioned, convenience is really helpful. And so they'll just cook faster. But since cooking doesn't affect fiber, they would still have fiber and be great.
I did not know what the pre-cooked meant, so thank you.
Yeah, it's so fun to be a dietitian. You get to
Yeah.
learn all about like food and eating, and you get to talk about food all the time and take cooking classes. And then you also get to learn the science about how does food break down, what are the metabolic pathways. You get kind of all of it. It's just such a fun mix of
Yeah.
science and art.
Yeah. We're just about at time, but there's one more. Somebody was curious about dates.
In what way?
Like, I guess it just says dates, but perhaps dates in relation to fiber.
Yeah, so dates definitely do have fiber. And I think that they can be a delicious and great option to have as well. Um, I would say, yeah, I think that they're totally fine. If you enjoy dates, you can have them and put them in different things.
Yeah, and delicious.
Yeah, they're very tasty.
I think that's everything. I thank you so much, Leah, for sharing all this great information. We really learned a lot. Thanks so much to our audience for joining us, for all your terrific questions. If you'd like any additional information or resources, you can contact Stanford Health Library. And we really hope that you join us for our next lecture. Good night.
Thank you so much. Bye.